Second Chronicles. Second Chronicles 16. Yeah, that's way back in the Old Testament. Did we have enough prayer lists come around? Anybody need one that didn't have one?
Y'all get prayer list?
I think the prayer list went around that side first, so.
You're welcome, sweetie. You need a prayer list? Y'all do?
Take it anyway.
Yeah, you need a lot of prayer and lists. What's that? Of what? Probably the same thing I need. Yeah. I mean, if you hang out with the Gordons as much as you do, so. We love you, John and Kay.
We do.
Y'all welcome Elvis to the building. I mean, we're fancy today. I think Elvis has scared a number of people around this building now that the last person who got scared by Elvis said, well, I'm fixing to get somebody else. And it got brought in here. So you can thank Robin for starting all of that. It was here for Stella's party. And then I came in the office Monday morning, and as soon as I opened the door, Elvis was staring me in the face. And it was a lot of fun in those few moments. Yeah, everybody needs your heart to stop for a good second or two and reset the whole deal. It's no problem. Yeah. So it was in my office, and then I put it in the door when people came around to the secretary's office. Then it went to y'all's Sunday school class. Now it's in the choir loft, I guess. So, there you go. Yeah, I did. Yeah, I brought it in there. I did that. Elvis got a nice tan in that one, though. He hadn't left this building yet, has he? Well, you don't have to worry about me singing, so. All right. So we're in 2 Chronicles, chapter 16, and looking at 10 verses. It's the account of a guy named Hananiah, who is known as a seer. He was the book of Chronicles, and Hananiah is one of the very minor prophets in the Old Testament. It doesn't mean they're any less important. There's just less about them. They wrote less than some of the others. And so this guy, Hananiah, plays a role that's pretty common for prophets. His job is to inform kings when the kings have strayed from God. And so as we all know what power can do to a person and what power can do to a family, especially a king, that's going to be a problem for him. So he's got the job of going to King Asa of Judah, who ruled for 35 years. Not all of them were peaceful years, but for the most part, Asa followed God. And then in year 36, you had another king, and you can pronounce it differently if you want to. Baasha is how I'll pronounce it. He is a king of Israel, and he invades Judah. And so you've got Asa that's king of Judah for 35 years. Some of it was peaceful, some of it not, but for the most part, peaceful. Year 36, King Baasha of Israel comes in and invades Judah, and Asa sent treasures over to Syria as a bribe to break his allegiance with Baasha and to join Asa. So now you got three people involved in here. And so you've got the king of Judah doing one thing. You've got King Baasha over here who has invaded him, and now they're trying to get Ben-Hadad, who's of Syria, to come in and sort of like be on his side, Judah's side, instead of Israel's side. All right? So what happens is Ben-Hadad says, okay, that's great, I'm in, your bribe works, and then Baasha retreats. And so he's on the way back, but Hananiah gets word from the Lord, and he comes to Asa and reminds him that God had been previously ultra faithful in all of Asa's wars against Ethiopia and Libya. All right? And so he prophesied then to the king that since Asa depended on Syria instead of God, there's his issue, that Asa will be what the prophet said, at war from now on. All right, so let's make sure we're all clear. 35 years, there were some conflicts, mostly predominantly peaceful years for King Asa. For 35 years, everything was great. Baasha comes in and invades Asa, and instead of Asa going to the Lord for protection and going to God and following God through this, he decides to bribe King Ben-Hadad of Syria with a lot of treasures from the temple, okay? And bribes him with what should have been the Lord's in the Lord's temple to get the Syrian king to come in and help and run out Baasha, and it worked. But God says to Hananiah, you need to let this guy know, because that was the prophet's job. Come in and tell the hard things sometimes and be able to move people out and in and say, look, because you did this and because you didn't include God in this, you're going to be at war from now on. Like, you're marked by war from here on. And so after that, Asa becomes no longer the God-seeking man that he had been. He gets mad at Hananiah and throws him into prison. And he ignores God's prophet. And I'm going to tell you something, that's never a good idea. When God's man, when God's woman, when God's prophet tells you something, rebukes you, and you don't listen, it's not a good idea. So in Chronicles, it says, and we'll read this in just a second, that at that time Asa also began to oppress some of his people. And 6 years after that, Asa dies from a foot disease. Had to be painful, had to not be a very beneficial thing to him. So the account, or at least a small portion of it, is in 2 Chronicles 16, beginning in verse 1. It says, in the 36th year of Asa's reign, Baasha, king of Israel, went up against Judah and fortified Ramah to prevent anyone from leaving or entering the territory of Asa, king of Judah. And so Asa then took the silver and the gold out of the treasuries of the Lord's temple and of his own palace, and he sent it to Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, who was ruling in Damascus. And he says, let there be a treaty between me and you, as there was between my father and your father. See, I'm sending you silver and gold. Now break your treaty with Baasha, so he will withdraw from me. So skip out on this guy. Me and you are going to have a new plan. And Ben-Hadad agrees, and he sent the commanders of his forces against the town of Israel. They conquered Ehon, Dan, Abel, Maim, and all the store cities of the Naphtali. And when Baasha heard this, he stopped building Ramah and abandoned his work. So the plan worked. But then King Asa brought all the men as they carried away from Ramah the stones and the timber Baasha had been using, and with them he built up Geba and Mizpah. And at that time, Hananiah the seer came to King Asa and said, because you relied on the king of Aram and not on the Lord your God, the army of the king of Aram has escaped from your land. Were not the Cushites and the Libyans a mighty army with great numbers of chariots and horsemen? Yet when you relied on the Lord, he delivered them into your hands. For the eyes of the Lord range throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to you, or fully committed to him. You have done a foolish thing, and from now on you will be at war. And Asa was angry with the seer because of this. And he was so enraged that he put him in prison, and at that same time Asa brutally oppressed some of the people. Father, tonight as we examine your word from 2 Chronicles, and we look at what you call us to do and how you call us to work and how you call us to rely upon you, God, may we see that in our own life and apply it to what we do going forward. And God, we thank you tonight for the opportunity to gather. We thank you, God, for what you're doing in and around our community. And God, we pray your blessings to be continued upon it. We ask it in your name. Amen. Interesting story. I love the Old Testament. It's one of my favorite things to study is the Old Testament. And so many times we just read it and you get caught up on all these names and like who names their kids these things. Like, thank God my mom named me Matt and not Baasha. I mean, come on. Who comes up with this stuff? But if we can get past some of those things and really read the Old Testament, man, there's a lot of stuff in there. And you got some pastors that say, let's just totally unhitch from the Old Testament and go totally New Testament. But this applies to your life in some great ways. King Asa does the wrong thing. Let's face it. You and I, we do the wrong thing a lot. Shocker, right? I know. My wife is perfect. She never does anything wrong. I do wrong stuff all the time. I get in trouble for it. Sometimes I think for myself too much. Like I decided I was just not going to cut my hair anymore. I'm going to just let it grow out. And my wife says, no, you're wrong. Cut it. And so you see that my hair is cut. We know who wins. I was wrong. She was right. See, we're being recorded. I'm smart. And that happens. You and I, we have a series of decisions that we have to make all the time. And things are constantly evolving. And sometimes we make the right decisions. Sometimes we make the wrong decisions. But in life, there is a such thing as an accountability. Now, I have people in my life who they have permission, friends of mine, they can call me out on decisions I make at any point in time. And we just know between me and them, if I see them doing something wrong in their life, I'll call you out. If you're doing something wrong, I'm doing something wrong in my life, you call me out, and I'm not going to get mad at you. That's the prerequisite. In church, we call those accountability partners. And they're people that we just talk to, and we just go, look, there's a lot here, and there's a lot here, and there's a decision, and there's things that I could do and things that I couldn't do, and I need you to help me talk through this. Sometimes they've got to come to you and say, dude, you're going down the wrong road, you're going down the wrong path, and I've got to hear that. And that's what Hananiah was called to do for Asa. His job was to come to King Asa and say, you goofed. You messed up. You should have listened to the Lord. You should have done what the Lord said, and you didn't, and now I've got to reproof you or correct you. And so tonight, what I want to apply from all of this is what do we do when somebody corrects us? What do we do when somebody reproves us? What do we do when somebody says, you did that wrong? I'm against that. God's against that. How do we respond? I've said it before. Life is 10% what happens to us and 90% how we respond to what happens to us. And so we look and we're going to see what Asa responded as, we know from reading the story, Asa got upset. He got his feelings hurt. Who is this minor prophet to be telling me what to do? And so he got so mad and knowing, because, here's the deal. Like, Asa is facing war. He's facing a massive thing in his country. And he probably, in many ways, thought he was being smart, wise. He's being crafty, and he's going to fix this. And he throws money at the situation, and he throws resources at the situation, and he did everything he could do to fix the situation without allowing God to be involved in fixing the situation. And we know that God can do a lot greater and higher and better things than you and I. And so probably Asa is sitting back in his palace going, man, we avoided that. Those guys were going to get us. Those guys were going to oppress us. Those guys were going to come after us. And he's probably thinking, I did the right thing. And there are a lot of times in my own home, I think I did the right thing and fixed something until my children or my wife say, Dad, you shouldn't have gotten involved. And then I get in trouble, and I'm going to tell you, every time that happens, I, first of all, get selfishly defensive. I get upset because if my kids are upset or my wife is upset, as a dad, as a man, I want to fix it. I don't want to just listen. Like, that's not doing anything to just listen. You know what? You're still crying. I want to make you stop crying, and I want to fix it. And so sometimes we go to meddling into things that the kids or somebody else just needs to learn to work out themselves. It needs to play out in their own interpersonal relationships. And dad just needs to listen, step back, and say, I'm going to pray for that situation. And sometimes we do too much, and then the kids will come to you. You made it worse, Dad. You messed everything up. Now everybody's like, why is Dad involved? And now I'm a snitch, and now I'm all this other stuff. And then you're like, your first response is, now I'm mad at my kid for being mean and rude to me because I'm feeling guilty for doing something the wrong way. And that's how Asa responds. He gets mad. He's upset because he thought he had it all figured out. And now this minor prophet dude comes in and says, no, you're doing it wrong. And now, because you're doing it wrong, here's your punishment. You've got away with this war for a little bit. You got away with this war and this oppression for a while. But guess what? From now on, your whole land is going to be oppressed by war and by fighting for the rest of the time. And where do we sit today? Have you seen the news lately? Nothing is pretty in that part of the world. And Asa eventually dies a cruel, kind of ugly death. And so we see how he responded, but if we look at just the opposite, we will learn how we respond when somebody comes to us and says, look, you're kind of missing the point here with God, and you've done it wrong. How should we respond? The first thing that we should do, and that Asa should have done, is to accept the truth. Now, you ain't got to accept a lie. There's going to be some folks who just disagreed with the way you did it, and they're just going to come and attack you. And you ain't got to accept that. But we got to be thankful, though, or Asa should have been thankful, that someone was courageous enough to tell them the truth and to trust that it's out of love. And that's where and why each and every one of us needs to find some kind of accountability partner that we can have in our life. And it probably shouldn't be your husband or your wife. Yeah, it probably should not be your husband or your wife. I really wouldn't recommend it be a person of the opposite sex. I would say if you're a guy, find you another guy that can say, hey, I'm here to do life with you, and what we talk about is private. What we talk about is just me and you, but I'm going to tell you the truth. And you can come to me and you can know that I'm not just going to argue with everything you do. I'm not going to try to get you to do it my way all the time. I'm just going to, out of love, say, you're right in doing this, or out of love, you're wrong in doing this. You're going to be able to come to that person and say, my wife and I, we got into an argument. This is what I did. Because most of our arguments, man or woman, we think we're right. We're absolutely right, and nobody else is as smart as us, and we got it all figured out. But maybe sometimes somebody outside the situation can come and look at our situation and go, dude, you were wrong. That was stupid. And sometimes that hurts to hear, like it did Asa, but we learn to accept the truth, to know that that person was courageous enough to risk his or her relationship with you. Because I'm going to be honest with you, as a pastor, sometimes part of shepherding is hard. You have to say that out there is wrong, or this over here is wrong, or this is better. And sometimes that's hard to do because you're looking at other people going, they're going to hate you. They're going to hate you. They're going to not like you. I mean, what if they don't respond and recognize you're saying this out of love? Then what are you going to go and do? Because here's the thing about American people, and it's true in churches. You look at a football game on a Sunday night or Saturday night, the next morning, there's hundreds of awesome, qualified, unemployed coaches all over Facebook. And they knew what play the coach should have called, but nobody's in that moment, in that spot, like that coach is to make that play call. And Hananiah is in that spot where God has told him, look, you got to go talk to this guy. And he knows he's going to the king, and he knows there's trouble that could happen. The king doesn't take this the right way. So we got to be able to accept the truth. Other times, number two, is we have to claim ownership of the wrong. We got to claim ownership of the wrong. We got to claim ownership of what somebody says we did wrong. Now, that still doesn't mean you were wrong. Just because somebody else said you were wrong. But what Asa did is just like fight it all the way. Argue with it all the way. Never accept any thought in the process. And a lot of times when you fight with somebody else and they say something wrong about you, if you were to sit back and relax and be calm for a minute, you would go, there's some grain truth in that. There's some little kernel in there that I can take away and I can say, okay, that might have been on me. That might have been part of it. And so what I would say to you is when the person comes to you, evaluate it. Evaluate it. Digest it. And develop a plan to make sure you don't get in that spot again. Like we react and we argue, but do we ever stop and really start thinking through from a perspective outside of our own little thing? And do we really evaluate the situation and go, you know, in hindsight, that might have been wrong. In hindsight, you know what, King Asa? There were all these times. Because you remember I said for the first 35 years, there were a few conflicts, but it was mostly peaceful. Why were there a few conflicts that never turned into oppressions? Why were there a few conflicts that never turned into major wars? Because he relied on the Lord. And the Lord saw him through. And for whatever reason, on this one, he overreacts and decides not to do it God's way. And I don't know that King Asa sat down and said, God, I'm not trusting your way this time. It might have just been a moment in his life where he was not as close to the Lord as he should have been. It could have been a moment in his life where he had been like skipping prayer times, skipping quiet times. He might have skipped a couple of services at the temple. And it was just a moment in time where he was backslidden. And the first thing that popped into his mind was not what God would have me to do, but what the world might suggest I do. Maybe he was listening to somebody in his inner court that was saying, you're powerful, king. You ain't got to sit back and hope something supernatural happens. You flex your muscles on them. You show them how strong you are and how much of a diplomat you are. And you can come in and you can do this political thing and you can show them how smart you are. We don't know why. We just know in this moment he does the wrong thing. And so if he could look back and evaluate the situation and go, now, if I put into perspective the last 35 years, I could see how God was working out. And if I could sit down and think about it, taking the treasures from my own palace and house and the treasures from the temple that were God's, maybe then I should not have done that. And then you begin to see it. And then what you got to do is you just got to let it digest. It's the same idea as sometimes when you eat and you eat too much, you're just like, and you don't need to go trying to do something right after that. You just need to sit down a minute and go, man, that was good. Like today, I went down to Rolling Smoke, had the barbecue tacos, really good. And I don't like watermelon, but the watermelon sauce on it was really good. And I just had to sit down and go, man. And just drink a little bit of water, get me a little, and just, that was good. This is going to help me today, and this is going to be good. And I just had to digest it and let it sit with me sometimes. And sometimes in our life, we just need to stop and just say, I'm going to sleep on it. I'm going to let this thing digest. We're going to come back in a minute. I've told everybody in this room, I am not a mechanical person. I cannot fix things. I do not have an engineering mind. I don't know how to build things. I know how to break things. I don't know how to fix things. And so I got this big, massive lawnmower out at the house, and I was cutting grass and ran over something a little too big, and the belt comes flying off, and I'm under there burning my hand trying to fix it. And I'm just like, why? Somebody here just needs to know how to do this and fix it for me, right? And then you think, wait a minute, I'm a man. I can do this. So you mess with it a little more, and you figure out you can't. And what I've learned as I've gotten older, go inside, sit down, and not, because I get frustrated, and then I start slamming stuff, and then before you know it, that screwdriver I was working with is out in the yard, and I get upset, and I just stopped, went inside for the night, came back the next day, and I looked at it and went, oh, that's got to go there, and that's going to have to go there. It's obvious. And then I get up under there and I do it. And then, of course, I send a picture of it to my mechanic friend and go, did I do this right? And he's like, yeah, you did it right. And I'm like, amazing what happens when I just digest the whole issue and claim ownership of the whole issue. So number 1 is accept the truth. Number 2 is claim ownership. Number 3 is to learn from your mistakes. Learn from your mistakes and move forward. That move forward part is almost as important as learning from your mistakes. Too often, we make a mistake and we want to learn from it, but we get stuck here and we never, ever move forward. Don't waste your time in guilt once you have pursued forgiveness. When you've owned it and you've learned from it and you sought forgiveness, don't sit there and hold yourself in a grudge. Don't hold yourself back from moving forward in the future and doing something. Yes, every person in this room, you are going to make a mistake from this point forward in your life. You didn't make all the mistakes in your past. You're going to make financial mistakes. You're going to make spiritual mistakes. You're going to make relationship mistakes. You're going to make some biblical mistakes sometimes. You're going to make mistakes of all kinds. But God doesn't want you to stay over here stuck in the guilt of that mistake. He wants you to move forward in that. Asa didn't do it. He didn't learn from it, and it ultimately killed him. He didn't learn from it. He was never the same person again. And when God's going, look, I need you to learn from it, ask forgiveness from it, because a sin is ultimately a sin against that person, but it's also a sin against God. And so not only do you need to ask the Lord for forgiveness, you got to go to that person and suck it up and say, I was wrong. I messed this up. And then it's on them whether or not they forgive you or not. That's not on you. It's not on, you don't need to stay stuck right here. If I do something to Fred and we're getting mad at each other and I body slam him and he's mad at me and he never wants to be friends again, but I go to him and I go, man, I know I'm wrong. That was really mean. I'll never body slam you again, Fred. I'm sorry. What can I do to make it better? All this. I've apologized to the Lord. I'm sincerely apologized to you, but Fred's going to be a 12-year-old and say, I am never forgiving you. Ever, ever, ever. And he keeps being against me. What Fred wants me to do is stay stuck right here in my guilt. What God wants me to do is go, you did your part, now move on and move forward. And that's what God is trying to teach us to do. Number 3, learn from your mistakes. Number 4, trust God. Trust God to guide you forward. Because let's face it, the reason why you got to move forward is because you were guided by self and you made some mistakes. And so you're like, wait a minute, I made a mistake in this last time. Now I got to learn to let God guide me forward. Because you know what? You ain't never done tomorrow before. You did yesterday, and you're almost done today, but you've never done tomorrow. And you don't know what tomorrow brings. And it may be complicated, and you may say, hey, that was just like something I did 10 years ago. But it might be a little bit different. And what Asa learned was, if I could do all those other stuff, moving forward, what I need to do is let God guide me every step of the way. And make sure I'm not at a place where, hey, I'm at a weak moment and I've been backslidden, and the first thought's going to come to mind is, how would Matt fix it? Or how would I fix it? Or how would a politician fix it? Or how would a governor fix it? But how would God fix it? And keep yourself in that position with God where you go, man, we got a lot of stuff to move forward, and we're not going to worry about what all these people say. We're going to worry about what God says. And then we're going to move forward in that process. And people tell you all the time, don't let pride and don't let ego get you in the way of turning to God. Don't let pride and don't let ego get in the way of you turning to God. Because look, here's the deal. I know I told you, I'm good at breaking stuff, not good at fixing stuff. So you know what I've done in my life? I've found some people in my life who are really good at fixing stuff. And I just have to say, look, no dude wants to go up to another man and say, I can't fix anything. That just ain't bro code. That is not man code. You know, ladies talk about it all the time. Men won't ask for directions. We don't even read the directions, much less listen to what Siri says. And I've had to learn, guess what? Some of it I can't fix. I got to go and ask you. And sometimes in life, we got to figure this out. And my mechanic friend of mine, his name was Thomas Mewborn, one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet, one of the most humble men you will ever meet, one of the best dads you'll ever meet in your whole life. And I go to him and I'm like, can you fix this? Oh, yeah, that's no big deal. And I'm like, no, wait, it's a big deal. Like, I can't even see and find that part under my hood. He's like, no, it's right there. And I'm like, well, that's going to take a long time. No, this part's like, no, I show up in your driveway and turn a little wrench here or there. About 20 minutes, we'll have it changed. What? I can't even find it. Now, y'all don't get too crazy. I know where the oil and all that goes. I got all that figured out. I can change a tire. I can do that. Find the alternator. Nah, probably can't find that. You know, I'm in trouble. But he's like, yeah, it's no big deal. And I'm like, Thomas, man, I'm so sorry that I have to come to you and do this. He's like, no, man. He's like, there's no way on God's green earth I'm getting in front of anybody and talking. There's no way on God's green earth I would never get in front of people and preach a funeral. There's no way on God's green earth I would ever do the things that you do. So let me do the things that I do to help you so that you can do the things that you do to help other people and to do other things. And I'm like, okay. And it's like God's going, dude, forget it. Get over the ego, forget over the pride, and turn to people that can help you, God being the first one. And we all deal with some sorts of ego and pride in different situations. And some of us in this room, some of y'all are really good at some stuff. And you're like, I'm not listening to anybody else tell me how to do that because I'm really good at it. But yet sometimes we need to listen and go, this guy might can teach you some things. This lady might can teach us some things. And we just go, man, I got all this. And we got to turn from God. And I look at all of this from a book called 2 Chronicles, back in the Old Testament. And there are people out there today that tell you, just unhitch from that. Doesn't matter anymore. How much of our lives would change? How many situations and relationships would we still have if we could deal with people telling us and showing us where we were wrong without blowing it out of proportion, without getting mad at them, without being caught in bitterness and guilt for 20 years? But we want to get rid of the Old Testament? It's in there for a purpose. And I love the Old Testament and the way it teaches us in our daily life. It changes us, it challenges us. So don't forget the Old Testament. Father, today we thank you for your word, for all of it, for the minor prophets and for the major prophets and everywhere in between. God, we know that we can learn from it. And so we ask you tonight to help and show us how we apply that. We ask it in your name. Amen. All right, Scott.